Hello and welcome to my show. Could you be more specific? This is Jonathan Steele coming to you through the Stay Woke podcast. And on this episode of Could You Be More Specific, I'm going to touch on social pressures and how it relates to the mental health of what's going on in our communities. Also, and how it also relates to the episode that was just broadcast with Atlanta. And how do we deal with the social pressures that go on, especially in our communities, to look and present ourselves a certain way. So, getting into it right now, what I want to touch on, especially with Mental Health Awareness Week that just took place, is we don't really talk too much about our mind states other than, especially in the Black community, other than either you got to suppress how you feel a lot of the times about issues, or you got to give it to God. And what you've noticed, especially over the last course of several years, is that the suicide rate amongst Black males is continuing to decline. And also the stress and anxiety also amongst Black women is also growing as well. So those are some things that I think we got to look at and touch on more so moving forward, especially because of the gap in between Black men and the rate of not just, loss of employment, but also incarceration, and also the overall opportunities in terms of education and healthcare that a lot of Black men are going without. Even the way that we're treated for health ailments is dramatically different. And Black women also face those same issues. Black women, especially in this country, in regards to the overall education aspect, are leading in the country in regards to not only they're getting a much better education, but in terms of a career standpoint, Black women are one of the highest social climbers when it comes to that. In relation to that, though, the pay for them in comparison to other female counterparts and men is far less, and that's something I don't think it's discussed enough. So it's a lot of pressure that women, especially women of color, in regards to also Black women, face that on a regular, everyday basis moving forward. Now, in regards to Black men and their mental health, a lot of people would say, well, maybe because it's just so much working against them, how can they balance out some of the things that are important in their lives in regards to, one, their health, making sure that they're educated in the things that they're looking to have a career in, and then two, how do they process their lives personally with their friends and family, and how that relates to the Atlanta episode. What I thought was actually interesting was the fact that all the characters on the show that you see, in particular with Earn and Al, seeing them as younger versions, you see that a lot of what they were as kids, that's what they ended up becoming as adults. Is that Earn's always kind of been a nervous kind of, he wants to fit in, but, he feels like it's just like he's always just going to be on the outside looking in. And how that episode was so interesting in regards to him having a FUBU shirt, which, if anybody that was growing up in the late 1990s especially, you knew about FUBU. That was at really their height. And so having a FUBU shirt at the time was a really big deal. But the fact that it got picked apart in regards to his label and how kids were trying to assess what was the real one between him and the other student, unfortunately, that's a real thing too. And that's something that I've never understood personally growing up, is that, you kind of get cut both ways with that. If you're a Black kid and you don't dress particularly nice, then you get made fun of a lot of times at school. But the other part of that no one really brings up is that a lot of times those kids may not be in the best neighborhoods, but they dress really well. And then you might have some Black kids who live in much better neighborhoods, but they're not necessarily wearing the most name brand clothes in regards to being socially accepted when they're at school amongst other kids. And that changes based off what school you're going to a lot of the time. But I do think that was kind of fascinating, the fact that whole episode dealt with the whole day that was going on for both those kids, that, who's real and who's not. And the fact that that's actually a real issue for kids, and it's going to be hard for you to process that when you're 13 and 14 years old, because, you're not working. The most important thing that you're dealing with on a regular basis is school. So that's why it seems so overwhelming when you go through that. Now, unfortunately, for the other kid in question, it got so bad where he ends up committing suicide at the end of the episode. And what was the most telling part about it is, even when you're explaining that to the kids, one of the main kids that made fun of him, he laughed. Now, you could say that maybe he just didn't understand, or maybe he just doesn't get it. But I think that's where you kind of got to hold a teenager more accountable in fact, that's a sign of what he's going to become as a person when he gets older. Because when we look at just the aspect of bullying, a person that bullies when they're a teenager, they're normally bullies when they become adults. So this is nothing new. So I think addressing that in our communities in relation to that is something that we got to be more vigilant on. In regards to, say, with Al seems like he kind of had just a go with the flow kind of demeanor then when he was a kid. And because he can kind of move along at his own pace, he kind of feels that way now as an adult, that, he doesn't move unless he really wants to move, and he's not really feeling pressured to do as much. But what you saw when he was younger as a kid is what he does now as an adult. He's very calm, he moves at his own pace, but he did look out for his family in his own way. So I think that's another interesting aspect to see of him when he was a child, because he's very much like that as an adult. But I think that's something that, in regards to that, in terms of the overall mental health of our communities, that we don't really discuss so much is when did we become so caught up on what kids wear and how much money clothes cost, especially when you got children that they don't have jobs, they're not making any money. So why would this be a huge issue? Like, who are we trying to impress? Are we trying to impress each other, or are we trying to impress the outside world? If you're a kid in any other school district, especially if you go to areas where they're predominantly much higher in income, a lot of those kids just wear whatever they feel like wearing. And some people may say something to them, some not, but it's not as much of a pressure thing. And I just wonder, moving forward with our mindset, is the mental health of our community especially, is it just completely tied to clothes and how we're viewed versus what we are? And I think that's another reason why suicide rates, and as far as, mental health awareness, needs to be on the incline, especially in our communities, and talking with each other, because it's not enough to say you look good. If you don't really truly have an idea of who you are, then how are you going to end up growing into the kind of person that you want to be when you become an adult? So, say from a personal standpoint, I don't mind wearing a label clothes. It just depends on what, one, of how I would look at them, and then how it relates to me. Is this something that I feel like doing? Just because something looks good on someone else doesn't mean it's going to look good on you. But maybe that's a mistake on my part from a male standpoint, because guys, while we face pressure, it's not the same pressure that women go through, especially women in our communities, especially because Black women are judged much harshly for how they dress and how they wear their clothes, and even down to how they talk. It's more scrutiny with that. It's definitely there for Black men as well, but it's not as high, in my opinion, when it comes to how we're viewed by the outside world. But it is something that I think that, how are we going to ultimately improve on that, especially in our communities? I remember being, in Birmingham, Alabama, and being a kid in high school. And I remember it was a kid that ended up getting, one kid got beat up for a pair of Jordans, and I think another one kid got shot over, sneakers. And I remember the worst part about that was that asking Michael Jordan about, well, how do you feel about kids hurting themselves over your shoes? And now I was just thinking about, what an unfair position to put him in, because it's like, he's not making their parents at the time spend $200 on sneakers. And why would we put that much value on it? And maybe furthermore is, if you're the parent and you know that kids want that sneakers, that's something you want to pump into your kid's head early on. Or maybe then it could be that in a position where that kid actually had a job, which a lot of kids would do. A lot of kids would work to get a pair of Jordans, and that's fine too. Do I think that person should be robbed or hurt? No. But it is interesting that, a lot of people, especially in our communities, have always tied our emotional feelings and how we look at ourselves based off what pair of shoes we're wearing, or what shirts we're wearing, or jeans. It's, in the long run, it does us in when we're competing to be an image of something as opposed to actually being something. And that's what I thought was really interesting about the Atlanta episode, was showing that perspective, especially when one of the kids at school, who happens to be white, when the whole thing's happening with earning his shirt, the first thing was that, hey, with him, it's like, hey, I've worn this shirt twice this week. which I thought was also fascinating because it's like, here he is, he's a white kid in a pretty, it seemed like the school was kind of mixed for the most part, even though the episodes were showing you mostly kids of color, that he didn't feel the pressure to have to dress or look a certain way, but meanwhile Ern did, or other kids who looked like him did. And also what I thought was fascinating is when that kid who ends up committing suicide ends up seeing that his shirt is kind of tearing, he still doesn't say anything to him, that even though he was getting ridiculed, he didn't feel good about kind of throwing him to the wolves, allowing him to be subjected to the same treatment. And I think that's also was fascinating, that for him to be so young that he had the wherewithal to think of that. And I think if someone like him was able to have lived and become an adult, his personality type would be a lot of probably what he would be as an adult. It would be, even if he was probably going through something that was really terrible, he probably rather seemed like the kind of person where he would rather go through that than possibly subject someone else to it. And I thought that was very interesting, too, that the episode actually touches on that. But yeah, those are just some of the thoughts that I actually have on that issue in general, is that is going forward, will we start to look to actually push for that, especially in our communities? Because mental health is a lot of times dealt with, especially when it's also related to, budgeting and how people rate that. It'll be fascinating to see if that's something that we start to actually allow that to be a layer as to what we have to improve our communities, and having more counselors and more people that, works in this field to help us. And I know a lot of that stems from, throughout the years of history where Black people have been used as test subjects, and it's a lot of negative connotations and actually results to why it's a natural distrust overall for a lot of people in the Black community towards the medical profession. And that's something else that we got to look at as well moving forward too, is also, how do we get more people in our community to become doctors and in all different fields that's needed in our community. So those are just some of my thoughts on that. I think moving forward, that'll be something that will be interesting to see for sure. And I thought that with the episode, what they did really well was kind of touch on what that life is like for a child of that age, especially in that kind of climate, because it doesn't change. And what's even worse now is that you're being recorded now. It's like, at least in that era, you would get made fun of, but you were getting made fun of at that school. It's now being uploaded on websites for it to be viewed. So that'll be something that I would like to kind of touch on more so moving on into the future, and how we handle that moving forward. I want to thank everyone that's had a chance to listen to this podcast. I'm looking forward to doing more in the future. I want to thank Dee for actually doing these videos with me. Thank you for listening to Could You Be More Specific? My name is Jonathan Steele. We'll see you guys again on Thursday, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these. Have a good one.